You know that pitch that you keep meaning to send to that big guest? Or that sponsor that you keep telling yourself, well, I'll reach out to them once I'm ready, or when my audience is bigger? This episode is about what's really happening in that moment between wanting more for your podcast and actually going after it. I've got HuffPost contributor and media expert Alice Draper joining me in the studio to unpack the psychology behind rejection and how this one fear keeps all of us from the visibility, the credibility, and the growth that you deserve. So if you're tired of watching other podcast hosts land the big guests and the sponsors and the traction that you want, and you're ready to start getting your show into the rooms that it deserves to be in, even if that scares you a little, this episode is for you. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Alice, welcome to the show. I cannot tell you how excited I am to dig into everything that we're going to cover here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Courtney. I am deeply privileged to be here today.
Oh, well, it's funny because when I first received your pitch, first of all, it was so specific and it was so refreshing. I cannot tell you how many pitches hit our inbox and it's like delete, delete, delete. And it's nothing against the person, but it's just like, did you even do your homework on this podcast? Your pitch hit our inbox. And you were talking about, the science of rejection. How can we, as podcast hosts and in business and in the other roles in our lives that we fulfill, how can we get better at not hiding and get better at putting ourselves out there and essentially building our rejection muscle, which is a lot of what you talk about and teach and what I'm really excited to dig into. Let's say someone right now has been kind of sitting on the podcast idea. This is for you listening if you've got a podcast idea, but you haven't brought it to life yet. Maybe you've bought the mic. Maybe you have tried to record a couple of things, but you haven't hit publish yet. On the flip side of that, maybe you've got your podcast. You've been publishing content, but let's say you've got guest wish list of these big guests that you want to bring on and you haven't gotten a pitch yet. Or you've got some sponsors in mind and you're like, yeah, I really need to reach out to them, but I haven't sent any pitches yet. Alice, I'd love to know, what fear is it that's usually hiding under that kind of inaction? Can you break this down for us?
Yes, of course. And before I get into that, thank you for commenting on the pitch being specific. That's like the highest compliment in my world. So underneath that is, I think, maybe I'm biased, but I think it's the fear of rejection. So playing it safe means that we're not going to be confronted with any rejection of any sort. So if perhaps you are thinking of starting a podcast and you're getting those little dopamine hits from talking about it with friends and getting a little dopamine hit from researching it and listening to shows about podcasting like this show, but you're not doing the thing, that's because the thing may not give you the dopamine hit that you can get from just thinking about the thing. And that's okay if you're comfortable with never doing the things you want to do in life. And I think rejection ties very closely to regret. So when I talk about it and when I question people, just people in my own life who are stalling on something, and it might not be starting a podcast, it might be applying for a job they really want or booking that trip they really want, and they're stopping themselves because of all these reasons, like, what if it doesn't work out and I can't do it now? I'll ask one question, which is, if you look back at your life 30 years from now or however many years from now, what would you regret more, doing the thing and it not working out, or not doing the thing? And it's almost always not doing the thing. So that, for anyone who is scared, because it is scary. We have pitched massive guests and we've had some phenomenal guests, but it's terrifying going out and asking these people when you yourself are not as famous as they are. And so every process of doing that scary thing, I always ask myself, what will you regret more, not doing it or doing it? And it's almost always that I'll regret not doing it.
It's such a good reframe, and it's such a simple one, and it's such an easy one to forget. And I want you to tell everyone listening right now about the wall that you have. I don't know if you call it like your rejection shrine or the wall of rejection, but you literally sent me a picture of this. And I was so inspired by this because on there you had some really nice messages from really big people who were like almost apologizing for rejecting you, but like that they said, no, not now, or whatever they said. Tell us about that and tell us, why do you keep that, and why do you keep that front and center in the work that you do?
Yeah, so I call these champagne rejections. So I call it my champagne rejection wall. So you make it into the champagne rejection wall if, one, you were a big shot, so I really didn't think it was going to happen, and two, the rejection is very warm, affirming, positive. It's not just like a no thanks written by your assistant. It's a personalized rejection. And to have those people write to me personally gave me a little dopamine rush. Because like, wow, I follow your work, I've read your books, and like you're actually typing this out to me personally. And I mean, I think it was them that wrote it. It seemed very personalized. And so I keep that front and center because I don't think all rejections are equal. I think that rejections like that, champagne rejections, are a door left ajar. And this is something I've transferred from my time in journalism because I learned to pitch as a freelance journalist. And within the journalism community, people always spoke about these rejections from editors. And I remember being told by journalists much more senior than me that when an editor gets back to you with something personalized, they've left the door ajar. They're inviting you to pitch them again. It's so much better than getting a cold response. So I think being able to focus on those warm responses allows us to keep going for those big goals and knowing that we're kind of moving in that right direction.
I'm curious though, because you're kind of getting to the heart of what I would label as imposter syndrome. And we all feel this. And you mentioned this a moment ago when you were like, who am I to pitch these people who are like so much bigger than me, so much more famous, so much more popular, and all these things. Why is it that you think visibility triggers imposter syndrome for so many people? What is it about putting yourself or your show out there that brings up all of the like, who am I to do this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think that there is nothing that's going to make us confront imposter syndrome and our egos more than visibility. So, I mean, that's it. You're exposed. Like when you are visible, when you are on that podcast, sharing a video of yourself talking, doing a solo episode of yourself talking, posting Instagram reels, being visible, speaking to the media, going in other people's podcasts, there is no way to hide behind now. There is no way you can say that, if it doesn't go right, you're not protected in the way that you were before you took action. And so I've seen this a lot where people are afraid to take action because they're afraid of how it might change their perception of themselves. And yeah, it is scary. And yeah, you might fail, but all successful people have failed. And that's part of the process. It's the only way you can truly move towards what you want to do. And there's lots of studies that show that we learn far more through doing than we do through theoretical learning. So failure is a great learning tool. And we need to, if we really want to get good at something, we need to be prepared for potentially things not to go as we planned.
Yeah, it's true. It brings back, it like conjures up these memories of the past of me standing on a podium in the third grade, giving a speech to my class. And our teacher had broken us out into these small groups. And I was paired with these two boys who were best friends. And I felt like such an outsider in their group to begin with. But they loved sports and I loved horseback riding. So my talk was on how to ride a horse, how to groom your horse and prepare it to put the saddle on. And I'll never forget, I'm standing there, giving this presentation. And they're sitting there in their desks laughing at me. My brain went blank. I didn't say a word of what I had prepared. I read the little bullet points on my index card and like got off of that podium as quickly as I could. And I think that experience has really stayed with me through the years, even unconsciously, subconsciously, when it comes to putting myself out there and showing up because of the fear of being laughed at, because of the fear of looking ridiculous and looking silly. And you mentioned this, it was back in episode 17 of your podcast. You said something about this fear of looking silly. It's like, well, I guess I'm going to put myself out there in this way, be very visible. I'm going to look silly. And the thought that came to me was, but I don't know if that's actually what other people would think if you were the person out there doing the thing, putting yourself out there. If I were to see someone taking big, bold action like that, I'd actually admire them. I wouldn't laugh at them. I'd like secretly want to be them. And it's so funny how we can internalize this fear of looking silly, fear of being laughed at. And something you also said in that episode is, that we can be terrified of rejection from someone else. Or when we're not worried about that, we're self-rejecting. This is such an important distinction. Can you break this down for us and why the rejection hurts so much?
I mean, also just to go back to your example of you standing on that podium giving your talk about horses, I empathize with little Courtney, and I think your response is completely natural. Those early rejections do stay with us, and I think they stay with us for a reason. And that leads into the question you asked, which is why does it hurt so much? It hurts so much because we depend on community for survival. So when we're rejected or when we perceive a rejection, that triggers our really primal part of our brain, the lizard brain, to say, oh my gosh, I'm in danger and I could die. And that sounds dramatic, but a lot of studies and stuff show that's really what we're feeling is a threat to our survival. And if you go back 100 or 200 or 300 years ago, it was, the further back we go, the more we can see how much we really depended on community for survival. If I was part of a tribe of some sort and my job is to pick the berries and I don't do a good job at picking berries and they say, we don't want you anymore, Alice. Well, I've lost my shelter. I've lost my food. I've lost my security. I am now probably going to die or maybe find another tribe who will accept me. So as much as we have evolved and changed over the years, I think there's a part of us that is still triggered, of course, by that. And we remain extremely communal people. So loneliness is a leading cause of early deaths, heart failure. We rely on our community hugely. If anyone does feel scared of being rejected, I will say that is very normal and you should not feel ashamed of it. We all experience it. I think the people who we see that are very visible are the people that have developed tools to manage that fear of rejection and take action in spite of it, but they don't eradicate it. I know very few people who've managed to completely get rid of that fear of rejection.
That's an important distinction right there. You're speaking to this need for human belonging. And I never thought of it until you were sharing this, but I almost am envisioning it like rejection is on one end of the spectrum and belonging is on the other. And why they feel so polar opposite, that we would resist that rejection so much because we want to belong so much. But also that, to your point, that there are celebrities, famous people, people we look up to, people we admire that still feel it and that they haven't eradicated it, nor will they. And as I think back through my experience, in my career and my upbringing, growing up, all the things that have kind of played a role into who I am and how I show up in the world today, it's really interesting because for a long time, I wanted to eradicate that fear of rejection. And I worked really hard to kind of just this tough outer shell exterior, it can't bother me. They can't get to me. But it was to protect my tender heart. I'm curious to know, can you think of a time where maybe it was that first rejection that really shook your confidence, or maybe where you thought I'm just not cut out for this? And what did that moment teach you about how we process rejection and how we need to process rejection in order to be able to move through it?
I also think I used to wish I could eradicate that fear of rejection. I was very afraid of rejection for my whole adolescence and a good chunk of my early adulthood. And that's what dictated my decisions. So I almost didn't do the things that would put me in the wake of rejection because it seemed like such a fatal thing to happen to me. I think my response to rejections at that time, if they ever happened, was I need to do whatever I can to not experience this again. And I think it's maybe I had a fragile sense of self and low self-esteem. And so I think working on our values and who we are and our self-identity is very important to become rejection resilient. But as I grew up and as I went into journalism, which I really cared about and realized that I'd get rejected a lot, I started to build that rejection resilience muscle. And I realized how it affects you less the more you put yourself in the wake of it. And my father had dementia has dementia, but I looked after him in 2020. And I talk about often how that year changed me. And I think that in a way I was hardened because I could see that I could survive things that I didn't know I could survive before. And so I think that rejection, in many ways, building that resilience is complex. But if there's one thing that I have seen through all my research and all the conversations I've done, is that the best way to build that rejection resilience is to find a community. Because you talk about, Courtney, how there's rejection and then there's belonging and how they kind of oppose each other. But if you can have someone or a couple of people or a whole community of people supporting you in your quest for rejections and being there to hold your hand when you do get rejected, that really challenges that part of our brain that is scared of rejection, because it's like, oh, actually, my community is here and they're supporting me and they still want to talk to me and have me in their community in spite of the fact that I am getting rejected in this way.
Oh gosh. Well, I want to hear how you actually went from being someone who was so afraid of rejection and like not putting yourself out there to someone now who literally has a podcast called My Rejection Story and who has nice rejections from Adam Grant and Dan Pink on your wall, like in your office. But before we jump into that episode where we'll unpack more of the how-to and how do we actually start to build this muscle and where is that muscle located in our body and how can we find it? One thing that I would love to get your take on here is, something I hear constantly from podcasters is, well, I don't have enough downloads yet to pitch that guest, or I can't ask for sponsors until I'm bigger. I've got 12 downloads on my show. What would you say to podcasters right now who are kind of stuck inside of this, I'll call it this wait until I'm worth it loop?
Get creative and start now. So we know that if you don't have a ton of downloads, it's going to be harder to get sponsors. If you don't have a ton of downloads and big guests, it's going to be harder to get big guests. But what do you have? And that's what we really started thinking about when we started the show, is how can we get big guests? And so I looked at my network and I looked at people I knew who could perhaps make some introductions, and I got some great introductions that way. I also prepared a really good pitch and we structured it in a way that made the show seem very appealing. I think also just knowing that it's a unique idea, so people will resonate to the mission behind it. But when it comes to sponsorships, you can think of ways where it's really beneficial for the sponsors, even if you're very small. So, for example, you might know a coffee shop and you want to do live recordings, and they could become your first sponsor, even though you have 5 downloads per episode, by letting you use their space to do recordings. And in that way, you've shown up as someone who has a sponsor and you've kind of got that brand recognition. You could even invite people to come live watch the episode if you're doing live recordings in the coffee shop after hours. So there are really creative ways. You just need to put yourself in the position of the other person. So whether it's a sponsor or a guest, just think, what would it take for me to say yes to this, even if it's not got all the downloads that they would want to go on a show? Because you're not going to lead with downloads. If you're very small, you should try lead to something else. Maybe it's values, maybe it's a connection, maybe it's being part of a similar community.
I love your call here to think outside the box and to get creative and to be scrappy with it, because this is ultimately how we are going to grow the show, to get in front of the right listeners. There's a lot that can go into that. And sure, we can talk strategy and tactics all day long, but if you've got a fear that's holding you back from even putting yourself out there to begin with, then the tactics, the strategy, they're only going to get you so far. So I'm really excited to get into the next episode with you on now, how do we start to develop this and some of the practical applications of building this rejection muscle and also sending pitches that get the yes or that are increased. You've got a lot of experience in pitching and we're going to dig into all of that, but to really be thinking about how rejection here is not the enemy and how we can use it as strategy. So Alice, thank you so much for being here to share your wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much, Courtney. It was such a pleasure.
I don't know about you, but this episode came at just the right time, because no matter how far you get in your journey, that imposter syndrome still rears its head. That inadequacy or these feelings of incompetency or others are better than me and that comparison trap that we all fall into, it gets all of us no matter what level of the game you are playing. And that's why in the next episode, Alice is joining us back to show you the exact process that she uses to turn rejection into a measurable growth strategy for your podcast. So if you're sitting here still convincing yourself that you need a bigger audience before you can pitch a bigger guest, but what you ultimately want is to be the kind of host that people say yes to without hesitation, then head with me to the next episode and let's make your business binge-worthy.